And New Mexico is a key player in what happens with energy reform and permitting reform. So thank you very much for joining us. We are waiting for Senator Curtis to join us. He should be joining us here anytime. Oh, Senator Curtis, it looks like I got a message from him, is here. Lucas, can you make sure he gets joined into the panel?
Yep, work on it.
Thank you. In the meantime, let me just introduce Senator Curtis. Senator Curtis, of course, is the U.S. Senator, one of the two U.S. Senators from the state of Utah. He serves on the Environment and Public Works Committee and is also the co-founder of the Conservative Climate Caucus. We're very excited to have him on today to talk about what is happening in Washington, D.C., what we can expect to happen with permitting reform, and what's possibly out there. So, Senator Curtis, thank you for joining us. I know you've got about 20 minutes, and we really appreciate you giving us that time. By the way, I followed your journey through Utah, the 250-mile hike. Looked like a fun time.
It's something everybody should do. I wasn't quite sure how it would go if we did 30 miles a day for 8 days. But I'm just telling you, it'll put you in tune with this earth and this beautiful place we live better than anything I know.
Yeah, well, hiking across Utah is one of the most beautiful states in the entire country. So I saw the pictures and looked like you were tired in the evening, though. Looked like you had
I
some
was
tired.
at the end of the day, I'm telling you, I was done. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. Why don't we jump right in? I know we've got about 20 minutes of your time. I really appreciate it. And then we'll go to Tom and Representative Dow from New Mexico. Um, you know, can we just frame the problem that and why permitting reform is so important at this moment? If you could talk a little bit about, the moment, what's going on in Washington, D.C., and why addressing this issue is so important today.
Thank you, and hello to Representative Dow and others on the panel. It's good to be with you, and thanks, Russ. Let me just tell you, this moment is far bigger than energy. This is national security. This is economy. This is broadband. I mean, this is really impactful. And we tend to often think about it in terms of energy, which is clearly very important. And from the energy perspective, we're also in a period where we need every electron we can get. And the good news is that has united my colleagues here in Washington, Republicans and Democrats. I think it's fair to say they come to the table with different things they want. Some want to see renewables flourish. Some want to see our traditional fossil fuels flourish. But I think everybody realizes that nothing can move forward unless we fix this problem, which does set the table for what should be success. And yet we wait for a bill to vote on, and we don't really even have text yet. The House has done some good work. Hats off to Bruce Westerman over there and others. But my colleagues here in the Senate tell me we're very close to a product, but we don't yet have a product that we can touch and feel and see.
Yeah, the House passed the Speed Act, sent it over to the Senate, and in the Senate we have, the Speed Act, Permit Act, Armstrong's American Energy. There's a bunch of options. Looking at it, and if you could look in a crystal ball for us, I know that's difficult. It's a tough thing for me to ask you to do, but can you give us a little insight to where you think this is going, and if you
Yeah.
think it'll even be done by the end of the year?
In the Senate, everything is really driven by four people right now. The chair and ranking member of Environment Public Works, and the chair and the ranking member of Energy and Resources. And they both have different jurisdictions. And you remember last year, the Barrasso-Manchin bill came out of E&R. I think they're working on a bill that's not a ton different than that. I know that they've made a lot of refinements to it, Senator Heinrich and Senator Lee. And I talk to them on a pretty frequent basis about their progress, and I think they feel good about the progress. And the reality of it is if Senator Heinrich and Senator Lee can actually come to a consensus, that's a huge thing towards getting consensus in the Senate. And then Chair Capito and Ranking Member Whitehouse on the Environment Public Works. There's few members of Congress that actually get along better than those two, and they work hard and they're looking for consensus. They too need to come out with a product. And so while we have the Speed Act and these other bills, the reality of it is it's got to come from these committees. And if it's not coming from the committee chairs and ranking members, it's going to have a hard time getting any momentum at all. The Speed Act does fit into that. And I would say, that's an important thing coming from the House, and signals where they're at. And the piece that's missing from the House is the energy and commerce piece that would go along with it, primarily dealing with transmission.
Yeah, yeah. What reforms do you think would make the biggest difference? If you could kind of, I know there's a lot that's going into this. There's NEPA
Yeah.
reform. There's Clean Water Act reform. What would you say are the key pieces that need to be
So,
part of
yeah,
the package?
for me, the key piece is not necessarily NEPA reform, but NEPA revision, unweaponizing NEPA. I think both sides realize that this has moved to a point far beyond what was intended to protect our environment, and we're now allowing these frivolous lawsuits and things to stall even very, very good clean projects that it's stalling. And so nobody wants to take away the environmental protections from NEPA, but they're, in my opinion, the most important thing that we'll do is figure out how to protect the environment, but also give people a quick answer, even if it's no, and an answer that can't be challenged year after year after year after year just to stall the project. And that for me is the center point. Now, for other people, there are things like transmission that is their center point. And the reality of it is I don't think this bill moves forward unless you really scratch everybody's itch. You can't really do a bill only on NEPA and get a lot of Democratic support without transmission, and vice versa.
Yeah, I've heard people say that even if Congress is successful at moving its reforms, that they'll go to the states and then things will get stalled out in the states, and they get stalled out for a whole host of reasons because a lot of the issues that need to a lot of the permitting issues end up having local problems. Can you address that? Do you have any thoughts on that? I know Utah's done a lot to kind
Yeah,
of deal to kind of address this issue. Can you kind of talk through that?
I can. I look, if every state was like Utah, we wouldn't have to worry about states. And if I had a magic wand, I'd say I'd totally take the federal government out of the loop and let the states do it. And so I would say from a Utah perspective, you're not going to get slowed down. You're actually going to speed up. But I do think it's fair to say around the country, you do have different states with different interests, and we do have to be careful that we don't solve the problem on a federal level only to become a problem on a state level. But I'll tell you this, states that have this figured out and the federal government will figure it out, give a green flag to projects coming into their state. And the states who are problematic will miss these projects if that's the case, because I think there's plenty of states where these projects are welcome.
Yeah, yeah. What are some of the reforms? Can you address some of the reforms that will make the biggest difference on the ground, especially around, duplicative reviews, transmission, uh, project certainty, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would just relist your list, Russ.
Okay,
You kind of nailed
please
it.
do.
And let me maybe touch on that project certainty. And I'll tell you what, I think everybody's guilty of this. Both the previous administration, this administration, when you could literally have a project go through and get permitted and then killed on executive branch level. I don't care if it's gas or wind, that the capital is not going to flow to those types of situations. And I think one of the lessons that both Republicans and Democrats have learned is that part of permitting reform needs to be some isolation from an executive branch who can cancel a project really without what's or cause. And that if you can't put that project certainty in, you're not going to get the capital that will flow to these projects. And then that's only a piece of it, as you know, the project certainty all along the way. If we have to figure that out if we really want capital to flow to these projects. Some of it's going to come naturally, but particularly in our evolving technologies, geothermal, nuclear, and some of these that just take a long time, capital is not going to flow if you don't fix that project certainty.
Yeah, yeah. There's been some conversations about kind of the tension between renewables versus fossil fuels and whether or not the reforms will benefit one versus the other, and whether or not, it's fair. Can you address some of that and what you see kind of in the conversations on the Hill?
So first of all, it's a very different environment than it was a couple of years ago, where it was kind of a either like we could pick this source or we could pick this source. In today's world, we really need every electron that we can get. I believe the market is driving and will drive three variables: affordability, reliability, and cleanliness. And that it will actually drive it stronger than we can from a legislative perspective. So I think as a stereotype, people will agree Republicans have overlooked the clean side of this and emphasized the affordable and reliable. And my Democratic colleagues sometimes overlook the affordable, reliable, and emphasize the clean. And the reality of it is all three of those are being demanded by the marketplace. And you can point out examples where if you miss one, you get off course. And so I really believe right now we need to concentrate on producing electrons, and the marketplace will drive those three variables. And the winners in the marketplace are going to be affordable, reliable, and clean.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. And the production of electrons should not be a partisan issue, right?
It should be, right. Yeah. And like a lot of times people will say, oh, fossil fuels are causing climate change. And I like to smile and I say, no, emissions, right, are causing, right. And I think there's sometimes this, like, we want to beat up on a particular source. My Republican colleagues sometimes will beat up on renewables. And I think, we all need to step back and say, look, the market's actually doing an amazing job of driving this. Let's clear the deck with permitting reform and let the market do its thing. And I think you'll find in the years ahead, we'll be affordable, we'll be reliable, and we'll be clean.
Yeah, yeah. I completely agree. I think and can we address kind of so what happens? Let's say we get permitting reform this year, and it's great reform, and it looks like it's going to really help things. Um, um, what what steps do you think specifically need to be taken to move fast as possible? Because some states have increased their energy use by 50%, and they haven't put any additional power generation on the grid in the last few years. What can they do to launch
Yeah.
things
Let's suppose
today? Today.
yeah, let's suppose hypothetically we get permitting reform, everybody loves it, it's starting to unleash these projects. We do have some real uncertainty about these data centers, what's behind the meter, what's not. I think it's fair to say we've seen this here in Utah. The information many people don't trust. You can tell them all you want that it's behind the meter, but they don't trust that. And I think we've got to, that's something that I want to work on a federal level, is bringing some reliable, predictable measuring techniques. If you're going to build a building and people want to know if it's sustainable, you can use these LEED certify standards. We don't have anything like that on AI data facilities, and I think we've got to give people some type of there's got to be more credibility with the claims that are made, and some certainty for people when these things are coming into their communities. And right now, there's a tremendous fear that their power rates are going to go up, that their precious water in Utah, water is gold, that there's not going to be enough water. And I think that would be the next phase to me after permitting reform, or hopefully simultaneously, is bringing a better awareness of why we're growing, why these data centers are needed, and then two, more what people can trust as they're coming into their communities.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we all saw this kind of unravel in Utah over the last,
Yeah, it
couple
was
months.
not pretty. Yeah,
Yeah.
there were no winners, right, in this. The
Do you think?
community, the statements were made. They didn't know who to believe. It was just
Yeah.
not a good situation.
Yeah. Under those circumstances, I know we've done a lot of research on this, on trusted sources, who people think is a trusted source. And one of the things we've kind of discovered is that there's just a total lack of trust in authority figures and institutions, which is a real problem moving forward. Um, especially when you're talking about trying to create some transparency for voters and for people in communities when they have large data centers and such come in. And I think that's kind of what you're highlighting is that anxiety that people are feeling, and the concern about rising rates as a result of it. Any thoughts? Is there any conversation on Capitol Hill about maybe how to address transparency issues, or do they even want to meddle in that, or is it something that you want the industry to kind of
Yeah.
just
So
voluntarily do?
yeah, I think the industry got behind this, and when they got behind, it's almost impossible to bring it back in if that makes sense, because people don't trust them. I don't want an oversized role for government here, but if there is a role for government of setting standards, setting criteria, I think that would be an appropriate role for us that I'd like to explore with my colleagues here again, so that somebody could trust. Let's say it's a closed loop water system, right? What does that mean to people, right?
Yeah.
And but the residents of Box Elders don't know, and they don't even know if somebody says it is, if they can believe that it is.
Yeah.
And so I think if there is a federal role, one of the things we could do is help with some accreditation or some standards that the communities can rely on when these centers are coming in. I would now, what is incumbent on the industry that I think they have failed at is, I think those of us in Washington understand why these data centers are coming. I don't think people at Box Elder know why the data centers are coming. The industry has to do a much better job of articulating why these are needed, why we want them here in the United States, why we don't want them overseas. And I think they have, quite frankly, failed at that. Haven't even really tried, I think.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point. Senator, look, I want to be respectful of your time. We would love to keep you on here for another, 40
Well,
minutes, but thank you
listen,
so
I
much
have
for
a
the time
real
you've given us.
suspicion those who have not answered questions have a lot better answers than I had. And my only regret is I won't be on to listen to their good wisdom. And I'll totally not be offended if they disagree with anything I've said, because there's a lot of perspectives on this. And for a few minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you coming on.
All right, best of luck.
Thank you. Tom, why don't we go to you?
Yeah.
It's great having the senator on. Why don't we go to you? I'm going to ask you a similar question I asked the senator about the different, all of the different versions that are out there. You've got Speed Act, you got the Permit Act, you got a whole bunch of different versions. You've got Heinrich and White House have a plan that they're kind of circulating, or at least the framework of it. Can you kind of talk to all of the different options?
Yeah, thanks, Russ, and thanks for having me. You can hear me okay? Yes?
Yes.
All right. And that was great from Senator Curtis. Appreciated your comments as well, and good to see you again from your time. He mentioned the House Energy and Commerce Committee was one of the committees that still is in the process of acting. That's the committee where I served as chief counsel and got to know former Representative Curtis back then when he was on the committee, and so it was it's good to see you again here, and also just being a part of that conversation. When it comes to multiple permitting bills moving simultaneously, and how does that all square? The legislative process is often messy, and these topics are multi-jurisdictional. This issue has batted around Congress for multiple years now, almost I mean really decades, but in earnest you've seen a real reinforcement of permitting over the last 2 to 3 Congresses, and really 5 years ago permitting reform was just largely about building infrastructure faster, whereas today it's about building infrastructure fast enough to do multiple things, to support AI, to support a manufacturing renaissance, to enhance our national security, to build out, onshoring of jobs, and then also to unlock more affordable options for existing ratepayers. Affordability has now quickly become the topic. So the multiple permitting bills moving through Congress is reflective of the complex nature of where all of the issues are spinning around. Some of these affect public lands, like in the West, and that's the Resources Committee. The issues that affect the grid and pipelines and other permitting goes through the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, both in the Senate and in the House. So, and transmission needs to become part of the bipartisan piece that, that alongside permitting of pipelines and other things that have been kind of the part of the debate over the last couple of years. So, the biggest question really, I think is we're seeing convergence around the problem right now, even if we're not seeing yet around the legislative vehicle that it will meet. But I'm optimistic that those building blocks are in place now to get us to a much bigger and comprehensive track that'll be more aligned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Tom. Yeah, that's very helpful. Representative Dow, looking at New Mexico, New Mexico is one of the states that I was kind of referring to when I said you've had a big bump in usage and the need for energy, but your productions remain fairly flat. Um, have any thoughts on what New Mexico can do now, and knowing that you kind of moving forward with the anticipation that this is going to happen this year, what you can start doing now in New Mexico to be prepared to take advantage of it once reforms are in place?
Yeah, well, one of the issues that New Mexico is facing is that the legislative body has chosen to delegate their legislative duty to commissions. And then, we pass the legislation, the governor signs it. She has primarily two commissions. One is on Water Quality Control Commission, and the other one is the Environmental Improvement Board. So these are 5 members of the public. They're not elected. So a majority of 3 get to decide water quality regulations, the air quality, hazard, solid waste, drinking water, petroleum storage tanks. Like, we've put these barriers in place that a commission of 5 with a majority of 3 get to decide, and they are not elected. So do not do that in your state. And then we have the additional burden of being, the legislators should take responsibility for voting yes or no on bills. And those bills should create a regulatory environment that allows Mexicans to have affordability while also caring for our natural resources. And in New Mexico, our historically significant artifacts. That's what people are most concerned about. And so out of fear, they've created these commissions, and it's been easier for lawmakers to punt. So we need a regulatory change to where lawmakers take responsibility for removing these barriers and setting the standards and the guardrails that allow for the production that we need for the citizens of New Mexico, while primarily they're focused on affordability and protecting our natural resources and our historical artifacts that are important in the state.
Yeah, this kind of went to the question I was asking Senator Curtis a little bit earlier, which is, you can pass the reform in DC. You can make it possible for states to do what Utah is prepared to do through their, Operation Gigawatt. I mean, they're ready to roll the minute the switch is pulled, and they're doing everything they can right now to help pull it along. But in New Mexico, if they pass it, and you've got a handful of commissions, you've got concerns over antiquities, or how do you prepare? I mean, how do you remove those roadblocks?
We
Especially
actually
with
had
challenges in New Mexico.
Yeah, we actually had an interesting way where the lawmakers took authority and we passed a pilot program to get around a federal barrier, which was archaeological surveys. So in New Mexico, tribal land and state and federal land, they all require archaeological surveys, even if your NEPA is complete. Our bottleneck is the archaeological survey. And in the federal regulations, there are waivers under extraordinary circumstances. And for us, those extraordinary circumstances happen to be drought, fire, catastrophic events, but it created a pathway for us to have, it's not the legal term because there is a federal paraprofessional archaeological survey that can occur. But we created a pilot program approved by the feds, cultural affairs, Indian affairs, our forestry, and all the key players came to the table and said, we need folks that can work under the supervision of an archaeologist. And so we piloted that last year. It was so successful. It's being expanded this year. And a lot of folks were looking at conservation practices, but the folks who are taking the course are being hired by energy companies and people who need to do transmission lines and want to build housing on tribal land. And so it's a lot broader than we thought it would be, and something that the federal guidelines already allowed, and that language that allowed it and does allow it is extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great.
And I
Hey,
would say the
Tom,
lack of energy
okay.
is an extraordinary circumstance.
Yes, well, it certainly is. It certainly is when we start having brownouts, and,
Yeah.
and people realize all of a sudden it's very important. and they become very unhappy when they don't have air conditioning. It's 100 degrees outside. Tom, can you, so industry groups and a lot of people on the right are talking about, Clean Water Act reform and how important it is and how it's going to stop weaponization of the Clean Water Act. Can you, and yet on the other side, you got tribes and you've got environmental groups, that are saying that this is going to remove a core, water protection tool that they need. Can you kind of talk about um, what reform would look like and give us your thoughts on it and whether or not it really removes the tool or if it just helps to streamline things so it can't be abused?
Yeah, this one has been, the challenge that has been debated up here on Clean Water Act or other types of Clean Air Act, many of the major environmental statutes that haven't been updated in, decades really is about predictability. Nobody benefits from uncertain permitting timelines. I think there's a lot of agreement if you were to hear Senator Whitehouse, who of Rhode Island, and Senator Capito of West Virginia, Republican and Democrat. What they want on both sides is durability. They all admit states absolutely have very important roles when it comes to water quality, when it comes to air quality. They also agree that businesses need predictable timelines and investors need certainty. And so the statutes that I think are trying to be reformed right now that are underlying some of these permitting delays really come down to, what communities get to do in meaningful review and how meaningful, a process can it be when there's, timelines and accountability mechanisms that are instilled, because endless, uncertainty really doesn't benefit anyone. And so this has been kind of the constant tension between, putting people on notice that there is a limited time frame to challenge some of these things or to review some of these issues on whether it's the Clean Water Act and delegated authority to the states to look at various issues coming up under the various Clean Water Act provisions, the air provisions. It's the same challenge. It really is. It's how do we instill decisions and accountability sooner without making weaker environmental protections. And so I think that's what you'll see relatively soon. The word is they're trying to put out at least the EPW committee, who is the core negotiators, those that chair and ranker some high level principles or some kind of path to show their agreement sometime later this month. So the hope is you'll start to see some of these kind of principles play out in actual legislation as it goes into the next phase, which again is playing out behind the scenes in the Senate right now, but more transparency will be coming soon to show, just the breadth of where these things are going when it comes to Clean Water Act and other things.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so if you were to look forward and if you were to look forward to where you hope we are in 2 years,
Mhm.
with permitting reform occurring, what is it that you would anticipate? What would you hope to have the world look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm spending a lot of my time really focused on, customers and what customers want, whether that's large customers trying to build things in this country again, whether it's residential customers trying to protect their ratepayer, their rates from going up, and the fear, which, as Senator Curtis mentioned. I mean, fear is really prominent, and you've seen in the Rainey Center polling. There's a lot of this, that just the fear of the unknown about what these new technologies are bringing to society really is creating a backlash against a lot of the need to build more infrastructure to compete with our adversaries in other parts of the world. And so what I would hope to see is a package that satisfies both fossil and clean energy advocates, because there is going to be natural gas as a part of this energy mix and a growing part of this energy mix. It can be done responsibly in a way that can help support the growth of this country and keep rates low. But we absolutely must have an environment for clean energy to prosper as well. And so the goal of this permitting infrastructure really is to spend more time discussing how we're reducing infrastructure costs by doing things that are going to provide more certainty provide more flexibility, allow states to do their thing, but also create rules of the road where states need to coordinate together. And those are the harder ones where you have to deal with transmission and multi-state pipeline permitting. That's where the federal government has a role to play here in facilitating the reviews, the build out, the cost allocation methodologies that states need to share in building this out. So we are at kind of a once in a generational moment here where we're revisiting all of these major infrastructure build out provisions that we haven't really done since, post World War II and, the New Deal era, where we were actually looking at this type of massive new infrastructure, like you could equate it to the interstate system or other things too. The digital infrastructure and the reshoring of jobs and advanced manufacturing is creating a lot of need for this. So that's where we'd hope to be, is having a place where durability and accountability can be measured via a permitting regime that's actually transparent and updated, and not one that we're kind of band-aiding across multiple jurisdictions and trying our best to litigate our way out of it, because nobody wins in that situation.
Yeah, yeah. It's a real, the litigation really is a problem, and it's created so much slowdown in everything. Representative Dow, you're out talking to people on a regular basis. And one of the things I love about state representatives is they are always in the community, and state senators are always out there talking to their constituents, whether you meet them in the grocery store or, at a town hall. What are you hearing from people? Are you hearing much about this issue with people? Do you feel like they have a grasp on it? And then how do you communicate to them the need for a serious look at building more capacity and more transmission, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fear. I think the data is pretty consistent across the nation. We have a lot of scarcity of water, traditional water in New Mexico. We have no shortage of brackish or produced water in our state, billions and billions of gallons of that, but we're not using it as part of the solution. And so folks are very fearful, particularly of data centers and energy rate increases. So you have our energy providers asking for 58% rate increases. And because the information is limited and folks do not understand, it's automatically the result of a data center. So that's what they see and what they understand. And so when you talk about alternative energy, it's interesting to see folks who pushed really hard for solar now be opposed to solar taking large footprints, where we're down to one coal mine. We're down, or I think we have 2 coal mines. We've closed almost all of our clean, affordable, reliable resources. We want to limit those, and folks not even understanding where electric energy comes from. So it's difficult to watch folks be opposed to the one remaining refinery that we have in the state, and then also write that they don't want to see any solar and they don't want their rates to go up. So there has to be a lot of consumer education. It is absolutely necessary. And of course, they're telling all of this to us with their digital devices, which is why we see the increase of demand. And it's a very difficult situation to be in as someone who's I'm in the minority. My district is Democrat. And so for me to hold this seat and to hear folks have conflicting reasons why they oppose additional development.
Yeah. A question came in. It was a comment, actually, on the chat about it's really about data centers, but concern people have about surveillance and their surveillance state around, there's this concern creeping into, why are we building so many data centers? Is it surveillance related? Do you hear that when you're out about?
Absolutely. And that we are a lot of uncertainty about AI and what AI machines will look like, what these robots will look like when they begin to think and solve their own problems. People bring up articles and they'll share an article where, one of them was an AI app. They were testing it to find out the validity of, how safe it was. And they had a fake scenario where some of the developers were having an affair. And when they said, okay, we're going to shut this AI app down, it started blackmailing. These were fake emails.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell your spouse about. I mean, these are real concerns. And people are like, we have a pretty good quality of life in America. I'm happy where we're at now, and we don't need more AI. We don't need to replace our jobs with robots. I have 2 colleges in my community, and so young adults are very concerned about where they will work and what life will look like for them. Affordability is an issue. And it's hard to, at the door to have a conversation, especially in New Mexico, say, look, the cost of housing has gone up in part because of the regulatory environment. And it's not just, like, what are the realities that's driving up cost? And a lot of it's our regulatory environment and how difficult it is to do business. And so just having these hard, difficult conversations when you've got 5 minutes at a door or someone has 3 minutes for public comment, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
And I
energy.
share the concerns. I share the concerns.
Yeah, and energy is is kind of the foundation of our entire economy. So if energy costs go up, everything else goes up. And if we don't have enough energy, if there's scarcity, it becomes a problem as well. I mean, Tom, any thoughts on how we communicate that to people?
Well, I think one thing that is underappreciated is, governments don't have enough capital to solve these problems alone. We need policies that make it easier for customers in the private sector, like to also invest and not do it on the backs of ratepayers. I think there's a big concern around the country that's spreading is, that the data centers and these other new large industrial loads, primarily the data centers, but others as well are, sucking up all the resources, the power, the water, like what's left for us. And I think, in a lot of places in the country, they're trying to think outside the box, right? They're looking at things that, you heard Senator Curtis talk about behind the meter power, private, almost islanded configurations where, you bring your own power solution, you pay for it yourself. It doesn't get socialized across a wide group or community, or the vice versa of that is, a data center comes in and on the front end negotiates a very a community benefits package that does provide benefits to the whole community, like microgrids and resiliency and, water configurations that are better than what they had before. Again, those are not the norm in every place. And so we have to really think about the role for private capital to be unleashed in solving some of these problems. But a lot of ways, the regulatory system prohibits that. It does not always foster these types of creative arrangements where you can have a flexible power supply that can come in and be turned on and ramped on and off based on, loads, electric loads that can be more flexible. And these are the types of policies that need updating both at the state, local, and at the national level. So, there's rules being written right now at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for every regional grid operator to have to update their systems to allow for large loads to be connected to the bulk power system in a way that incentivizes more flexibility and more ability to bring their own power. These are things that I think, we need to do a better job of explaining to the public on. There are solutions for these things. They're not, we don't have to fit it into the square, round peg, square hole scenario that we have always had for the last 100 years in building out our infrastructure. And that's really what permitting reform is becoming. It's not just speed. It is now reform to the system to unlock a lot of these other new types of affordable private capital driven state specific issues that can be unleashed, on behalf of and in protection of ratepayers, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, you want a system that unleashes innovation and allows for new ideas. We had an interesting question come in about tax breaks related to data centers. I think we might want to address it. The question was, for the first time since the railroads communities are giving out huge tax breaks to bring in data centers. Why would they do this considering it's not a national security issue, although I think data centers kind of are to some degree a national security issue. I've written some on this. Any thoughts either of you have about what communities can do to kind of communicate? Because I don't think that's necessarily true. I think a lot of communities are getting quite a bit of tax revenue from data centers. Can you address either you want to address this question? Tom,
I'll defer to the representative first, and then I'm happy to say it.
Yeah.
Well, there's been a couple of data centers right now trying to come to New Mexico, and it was actually Democratic-led county commission and Democratic-led statewide legislation that allowed the data centers to come in and to receive tax breaks, but kind of behind the grid, right? They're supposed to bring their own energy. They're supposed to bring their own water. Well, how did they acquire it? They acquired it by purchasing it from existing farmers, from existing, I mean, these are private property rights, and people are saying, hey, I'll do this. But they did get very, very, very big tax incentives. And then, of course, those lawmakers in the area were able to get some charitable dollars and direct them to charities of their choice and things that were important to them. And then the citizens started finding out about it. And another data center on public land would not be contributing to, say, property tax. And in a Western state, these things matter. In a Western state, you know, some of my counties, that I'm in a rural area, so I have 3 counties, are over 80% state and federal land. So if there's a new opportunity for revenue, industrial development, what is the city going to see? What are the schools going to see? What are the counties going to see? What's the road and water infrastructure? Well, if they're using state land or public land, government-owned land, then how is that realized? At the same time, you know, it does seem to the citizens that the incentives are much more on the corporate side, but if you're developing billion-dollar incentive programs that, you know, can balloon to $3 billion, New Mexico just took on universal childcare. These things cannot be accomplished. This development cannot be accomplished without public-private partnerships. So now we're seeing sort of an anti-capital, they're going to call it capital venture. You know, we're not for capital venture. We're not for large corporations. And so it's just, you cannot have all the above. And these conversations are extremely difficult to have in a 5-minute conversation at the door. But it does appear that some of the data centers are getting very, very nice deals and opportunities to create billions and billions of revenue, billions of dollars in revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. I suspect this probably does. Tom, I'll let you say something, but I suspect this probably does have, it does probably bring to mind that we really should have some public conversations about some of this before some of these projects are cited, but that raises all other kinds of concerns, right? So Tom, do you have a comment on it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the tax issues are really a state and local issue, even though, you know, I'm most familiar with federal tax credits for energy, which, you know, has been done since 2005 and, you know, has created you know, different ways to incentivize types of behavior, and that's what we've modeled the tax code to try to, you know, push out new technologies, whether it be renewables and solar and wind. On the economic development side, you know, it really is a state and local decision about how, you know, they want to frame the community benefits around, you know, attracting private capital, what that does for the local, you know, roads and school districts and, you know, resources that the community has. And I think obviously the influx of development has changed the narrative quite quickly on these types of deals or tax benefit treatments that have been kind of standard across the country as short as 2 years ago. And it wasn't just for data centers, it's also for other major manufacturers building a auto factory or a steel mill or other types. Like, people want the local development. Now they question whether it's the right kind of job or the wrong kind of job, or is it what type of environmental impact. So these are all things that, again, I mean, I think are natural progressions of just having the spotlight shine on the data center movement that is happening at fever pitch right now. And I think each community is really having to address it in their own way. Some are doubling down, some are removing themselves entirely from tax credits. So it just depends on the state and local regime.
You know what I would say is that, you know, just one thing that I would add is that the biggest concern you hear in New Mexico is the water, because we are in a multi-year drought, and it's difficult to have a conversation. You want to talk about, you know, 500 years worth of brackish water that we're sitting on, brackish and brine water that we're sitting on, or the fact that our state is exporting $2.8 billion a year of produced water, and that they're actually using the research from our great institutions in New Mexico on desalination to build these desalination plants outside of our state, because we have not had the political will to create the regulatory environment to solve that water problem. We do not have a lack of water in New Mexico. We have a lack of use of non-traditional water. So that seems like an easy solution to me. And even that has been a difficult lift.
Yeah, these are not easy conversations, unfortunately. and especially with the public. I'll just add, I just want to add one thing about the data centers. I think that sometimes, when data centers come in the community, they do upgrade the grid, which is a huge benefit to the community. And there's a lot of advantages that come with it that aren't necessarily tax advantages. So a lot of communities are going to end up having to have these conversations and factor those questions into whether or not they move forward on some of these big projects. And I do think involvement in the community is probably something worthwhile. We're kind of running out of time. I want to give each of you a chance to say something. I'll just say this. I think this conversation, has highlighted for me one thing, which is we are in a major moment in the United States, and we have an opportunity, I think, to lay the framework for which our economy will continue to grow and we will lead the world. But it's going to require us to look at permitting reform, how we create energy, how we allow for energy projects to move forward without getting stalled up for 4.5 years in the permitting process and sometimes multi-years of litigation. All of these things we need to work through. We need to work through as quickly as possible so we can remain leaders in the world. Tom, I'll go to you first, and then Representative Dow, and then we'll let you say some closing comments, and then we'll call this thing.
Thanks, Russ. And I would echo that. I would just say at the national level, there is a meeting of the minds. As polarized as we are in today's society, there is a meeting of the minds of both the left and right on the need to address this issue. And that has seen it's loud and clear from the Senate leaders. You're now hearing it from the chairman of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and you're hearing it from the House leadership and obviously the House Resources Committee. Those are the prime areas of need to be authors of this reform. So I am quite optimistic that I think the themes that everybody needs to come home to is that, yes, AI is changing everything. Affordability is front and center, and every permitting decision should ultimately be judged by one question: does this lower costs for customers? And that's really changing the needle on the politics and the narrative behind the art of the possible here. It continues to just, in my view, elevate the art of the possible because the affordability mindset and the AI, challenges are really changing everything. And so the meeting of the minds is there. The hard work is still, not done, and it's, getting it done is going to be often messier before it gets to fruition, and it may play out all the way in a lame duck session. But at the end of the day, in the work that we're doing and seeing behind the scenes, and with my former colleagues on the Hill, I know that they are determined to see something pass. And so I would say keep close watch on these topics and stay informed with the Rainey Center and with our work here too, so we can help educate and inform everyone of what actually is on the deck when the bills start to come out and move forward. So,
Representative Dow.
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's about quality of life and it's about affordability. It's about improving everyday life of American citizens. And at the state level, you have to look at I hope that there is a federal AI solution, that there is a federal standard that we come up with AI, especially around privacy and protecting, human resources, our natural resources for humans, for agriculture, and for wildlife and our natural resources. And those are a priority to be protected. And from there, we've got to have some definitive times and answers. Yes or no. I'd rather get a no and an answer than just this definitive. There is never, ever an end of the regulatory process and challenges. And so I look forward to a federal regulatory environment that has definitive yes or no times. And then at the state level, looking at natural resources, protecting what makes our states great, but also thinking about how to remove those barriers and use our natural resources. It's hard to be in a state that is a Western state, mostly federal and state land, and to be in a situation in New Mexico, sitting on every resource we need to have a yes and a yes. And because of fear, because of lack of understanding, because of unanswered questions, because of ambiguity, we end up with no's. My dad always said, it's like in commas, the rule of commas: if in doubt, leave it out. And that's where citizens are like 80-20 right now. If they don't understand, they'd rather go without. They
Yeah.
can live life with the way it is right now. And so we have a lot to do, a lot of work to do to prove to people that this is going to improve the quality of their life.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both for joining us. I just want to conclude this by saying, those of you who are joining Rainey Center for the first time, stay in touch with us. We're going to be doing a lot more of this stuff. Also, if you have an opportunity, please feel free to call your member of Congress and encourage them to pass permitting reform. And please share with them your thoughts. Be kind, understand that they're dealing with a lot, but this is critical. It's super, super important. I think one of the most important things we're dealing with right now because of a lot of the things we discussed today. And we are definitely, Representative Dow, looking at ways to try to address some of the concerns people have about AI. And we'll be discussing that further in the future. Thank you all again for joining us, and have a wonderful day.